My wife was standing in our business parking lot, tears streaming down her face, while our 70-year-old neighbor screamed inches from her nose that he was going to get rid of us once and for all. That's when I realized this bitter old man had no idea what he'd just unleashed. Because 3 days later, I was going to introduce him to Jesus in a way he'd never forget. If you've ever had to deal with a neighbor from hell who thought they could intimidate you into giving up on your dreams, then you're going to love this story. Hit that like button right now because what I did to this guy was so creative, so perfectly justified, and so absolutely biblical that it'll restore your faith in karma. And make sure you subscribe because stories like this are exactly what we do here. 4 years ago, my wife Sarah and I took the biggest leap of our lives. We'd been talking about starting our own business for years. You know how it is, those late night conversations where you dream about being your own boss, about building something that's truly yours. Well, we finally did it. We scraped together our savings, maxed out our credit cards, and launched our small consulting firm from our garage. Now, I need to paint you a picture of where we started. Our little suburban neighborhood was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where people waved from their driveways and borrowed sugar from each other. It was quiet, residential, the American dream kind of street. Our garage turned office fit right in. We had maybe 3 or 4 clients. Sarah handled the administrative side while I focused on the consulting work, and honestly, we were just happy to be making ends meet. But then something incredible happened. Word of mouth started spreading. Our clients were happy, really happy, and they started referring to their friends. Then their friends referred their friends. Within 6 months, we went from 4 clients to 20. By the end of year 1, we had 45 clients and had to hire our first employee. I remember the exact moment I realized we'd outgrown our garage. It was a Tuesday morning, and I was trying to conduct a video conference with a potential client worth $50,000 while Sarah was on the phone with another client, and our employee Jake was attempting to organize files in what used to be our tool storage area. The client on the video call kept asking about the lawn mower in the background, and I knew we looked unprofessional. That's when we made the decision that would change everything. We found a small commercial space about 2 blocks away, still in the same neighborhood. It wasn't huge, maybe 1,500 square feet, but it had proper offices, a conference room, and enough parking for our growing team. We were so excited, so proud. This felt like we were really making it. The space was on Maple Street, just 1 street over from our house on Oak Street. The building was a converted house that had been zoned for small businesses years ago. There was a dental office on one side, a small accounting firm on the other, and us in the middle. It was perfect. Moving day was exhausting but exhilarating. Sarah and I, along with Jake and our new hire Michelle, spent the entire weekend moving equipment, setting up desks, and organizing our new space. I'll never forget the moment we hung our business sign outside. Thompson Consulting Services. Sarah took a picture of me standing under it, and I was grinning like an idiot. We'd made it. We were real business owners now. That's when we met Harold. Harold Fitzgerald was 72 years old, lived alone in the house directly behind our new office, and apparently had nothing better to do than monitor every single thing that happened in a 3-block radius. Now, I want to be fair here. At first, Harold seemed like just another concerned neighbor. He introduced himself the first week we moved in, asked about our business, and seemed genuinely interested. But then the complaints started. It began small. Harold called the city about our sign, claiming it was too bright and disrupted the neighborhood aesthetic. The city inspector came out, measured our sign, and told us it was perfectly within regulations. Harold wasn't satisfied. He called again, this time claiming our sign was positioned incorrectly. Another inspector visited. Same result, we were completely compliant. Then he complained about our parking. We had 4 designated spots behind our building, all properly marked and legal. But Harold decided that our clients were congesting the neighborhood. He called the city traffic department. They came out, observed our parking situation during peak hours, and confirmed we were causing 0 traffic issues. But Harold was just getting started. Week 3, he complained about our excessive noise. Keep in mind, we're a consulting firm. Our noise consisted of normal office sounds, people talking, phones ringing, the occasional printer. Nothing even close to a noise violation. The city inspector came out with a decibel meter, measured our noise levels, and told Harold he was wasting their time. By month 2, Harold had called the city 17 times about our business. 17 times. Each complaint was investigated. Each complaint was found to be baseless, and each complaint was becoming more desperate and ridiculous. He complained that our employees were suspicious looking. He complained that we were probably running an illegal operation. He even complained that our window blinds were the wrong color for the neighborhood. That's when the city put Harold on what they called a vexatious caller list. Basically, they told him to stop calling unless he had a legitimate emergency, and that any future complaints would need to be submitted in writing with photographic evidence. Now, any reasonable person would have taken this as a sign to back off, right? Not Harold. If anything, being told to stop just made him angrier. He started taking pictures of our building, our cars, our employees. He'd stand in his backyard with binoculars, watching our office like he was conducting surveillance. But the real turning point came about 3 months after we'd moved in. Our business was booming, we'd grown to 12 employees and were looking at expanding to the second floor of our building. Success was intoxicating, and Sarah and I were working longer hours than ever. It was a Thursday evening, around 7 p.m. Sarah was staying late to finish up some client proposals while I went home to grab us dinner. When I got back to the office, I found Sarah standing in our parking lot, visibly shaken. "What happened?" I asked, immediately sensing something was wrong. Sarah's voice was trembling. "Harold. He was screaming at me." Apparently, one of our clients had accidentally parked in Harold's driveway instead of our lot. An honest mistake. The driveways were adjacent, and in the evening light, it was easy to confuse. Our client had realized the error within minutes and moved their car, but Harold had seen the whole thing and completely lost it. He'd come storming out of his house, screaming at Sarah about "you people" and how we were ruining the neighborhood. When Sarah calmly explained that the person who'd parked in his driveway wasn't even our employee, just a client who'd made an honest mistake, Harold had gotten right in her face. "I don't care who they are," he yelled. "This is all your fault. You and your husband think you can just come in here and take over our neighborhood." Sarah had tried to de-escalate, apologizing for the confusion and offering to put up clearer parking signs. But Harold was beyond reason. "You're going to be sorry," he'd said, his face red with rage, pointing his finger inches from her nose. "I'm going to get rid of you people once and for all. You have no idea what I'm capable of." Then he'd stormed back into his house, slamming the door so hard it shook the windows. As Sarah recounted this story, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: pure, unadulterated rage. This wasn't just about business anymore. This man had threatened my wife. He'd made her feel unsafe in her own workplace. He'd crossed a line that should never be crossed. My first instinct was to march over to Harold's house right then and there. I wanted to knock on his door and have a very direct conversation about what happens to people who threaten my family. My hands were literally shaking with anger. But Sarah grabbed my arm. "Don't," she said. "That's exactly what he wants. He wants you to lose your temper so he can call the police and say you threatened him." She was right, of course. Harold was baiting us, trying to get us to react in a way that would justify his complaints. But that didn't make it any easier to swallow. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Harold's words, about the look of fear in Sarah's eyes, about how this bitter old man was trying to destroy everything we'd worked for. I'd never felt so powerless in my life. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went to church. Not because I'm particularly religious, but because I needed perspective. I needed to figure out how to handle this situation without becoming the kind of person I didn't want to be. The sermon that Sunday was about turning the other cheek, about responding to hatred with love. What would Jesus do? The pastor asked. It was such a simple question, but it hit me like a lightning bolt. What would Jesus do? He certainly wouldn't throat punch a 72-year-old man, no matter how much that man deserved it. But Jesus was also pretty creative when it came to dealing with people who were hurting others. He didn't just passively accept injustice. He found ways to shine light on it, to make people confront their own behavior. That's when the idea hit me. I spent the next week doing research. I called the city clerk's office and requested all of Harold's complaint records. 17 complaints, all dismissed, all clearly frivolous. I documented every interaction we'd had, every time he'd harassed our employees, every photo he'd taken of our building. But more importantly, I started researching Harold himself. Public records showed he'd been making complaints about various neighbors for over a decade. The family before us had dealt with him complaining about their loud children. The small grocery store 2 blocks over had been subjected to months of complaints about their excessive deliveries. This wasn't about our business specifically, this was about Harold's need to control everything around him. He was a bully, plain and simple, and he'd been getting away with it for years because most people just moved away or gave up rather than fight back. But we weren't going anywhere. We'd built something beautiful, something we were proud of, and no bitter old man was going to take that away from us. The breakthrough came when I was researching Harold's background online. I found his phone number listed in one of those public directory sites. Just seeing it there gave me an idea, but I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it yet. Then I remembered something from college. My roommate had been raised as a Jehovah's Witness, and he'd told me about their incredibly organized outreach programs. They had text messaging services, email lists, study courses, all designed to help people find their way to Jesus. And that's when it hit me. Harold clearly needed Jesus in his life. He needed to learn about love, compassion, forgiveness, and community. Who was I to deny him that opportunity? I spent the next 3 hours online, finding every single Jehovah's Witness text service I could locate. And let me tell you, there are a lot of them. They have services for Bible study, daily devotionals, inspirational messages, prayer requests, community events, and something called spiritual guidance for difficult times, which seemed particularly appropriate. Each service required a phone number to sign up. Each service promised regular text messages with biblical wisdom and opportunities for spiritual growth. Each service was completely free and designed to help people find peace and purpose in their lives. I signed Harold up for all of them. Now, I want to be clear, everything I did was completely legal and, in its own way, genuinely helpful. Harold was obviously struggling with anger, with the need to control others, with an inability to find joy in life. These services were designed to help people with exactly those kinds of spiritual challenges. The first service I signed him up for was called Daily Blessings. It promised to send an inspirational Bible verse every morning at 6 a.m., along with a brief reflection on how to apply biblical principles to daily life. The second was Prayer Warriors, which sent prayer requests from around the world, giving Harold the opportunity to pray for others who were struggling. The third was Bible Study Buddy, a comprehensive program that would text him daily lessons from various books of the Bible, starting with the Gospels and working through the entire New Testament. But my favorite was Spiritual Guidance for Difficult Times. This service was specifically designed for people dealing with anger, resentment, and conflicts with others. It promised daily texts with biblical wisdom about forgiveness, compassion, and finding peace in difficult relationships. I filled out each form carefully, making sure to include Harold's full name and phone number. In the "How did you hear about us" section, I wrote things like seeking spiritual guidance and recommended by a concerned neighbor. The confirmation emails started arriving within minutes. Each service welcomed Harold to their community and promised that his spiritual journey was about to begin. Most mentioned that after completing their initial study programs, they would continue to send regular encouragement texts for the foreseeable future. I have to admit, I felt a little guilty at first. But then I remembered Sarah's trembling voice, the fear in her eyes, and Harold's threat to get rid of us once and for all. This man had made our lives hell for months. He'd harassed my wife, threatened our business, and wasted countless hours of city resources with his frivolous complaints. If he was going to receive daily reminders about love, forgiveness, and treating others with kindness, well, that seemed like exactly what he needed. The first texts would start arriving the next morning. I didn't tell Sarah what I'd done, at least not right away. I wanted to see if it would actually work before getting her hopes up. But I have to admit, I was excited. For the first time in months, I felt like I'd done something proactive instead of just reacting to Harold's harassment. The next morning, I got to the office early and positioned myself where I could see Harold's backyard. At exactly 6 a.m., I saw him come outside in his bathrobe to get his newspaper. His phone buzzed. He looked at it, frowned, and went back inside. Within an hour, his phone had buzzed 4 more times. By lunch, it was buzzing every 20 minutes or so. From my office window, I could see him getting increasingly agitated, checking his phone constantly, and at one point, throwing his hands up in frustration. The real test came that afternoon. Normally, Harold would spend at least an hour in his backyard around 3 p.m., watching our office with his binoculars and taking photos. But that day, he kept getting interrupted by his phone. Every time he'd focus the binoculars on our building, buzz. Every time he'd raise his camera, buzz. Every time he'd settle into his surveillance routine, buzz. After about 20 minutes of this, he threw his binoculars down and stormed back into his house. For the first time in months, we had a peaceful afternoon at work. That evening, I told Sarah what I'd done. I was a little nervous about her reaction. She's always been more diplomatic than me, more willing to take the high road. But when I finished explaining, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she started laughing. Not just a little chuckle, but deep, uncontrollable laughter. "You signed him up for Jehovah's Witness texts?" she gasped between laughs. That's brilliant. It's like you're literally trying to save his soul." "Exactly," I said. "If he's going to be miserable, he might as well learn about love and forgiveness while he's at it." The next few days were glorious. Harold's phone was buzzing constantly. I'd estimate he was getting 20 to 30 texts per day. Each service had its own schedule, its own style, its own approach to spiritual guidance. Some were gentle and encouraging, others were more direct about the need for repentance and change. The best part was watching Harold's attempts to continue his harassment campaign. He'd come outside to spy on us, his phone would buzz, he'd check it, get irritated, put it away, then it would buzz again. He'd try to take photos of our building, but every time he'd raise his camera, another spiritual message would arrive. I started keeping a log of his behavior, just out of curiosity. Before my intervention, Harold would spend an average of 2 hours per day actively watching our office. After the text started, that dropped to about 20 minutes, and even then, he was constantly distracted. The city complaints stopped completely. Turns out it's hard to focus on writing detailed complaints about parking violations when you're receiving constant reminders about patience, tolerance, and loving your neighbors. But the real victory came about 2 weeks later. Sarah and I were working late again, and I saw Harold come outside around 8 p.m. Instead of his usual routine of glaring at our building, he was talking on his phone. But this wasn't an angry conversation, he actually seemed calm, almost peaceful. Later, I realized what had probably happened. The Jehovah's Witnesses are incredibly persistent and caring people. When someone signs up for their services, they don't just send texts, they follow up. They call to check on people's spiritual progress. They offer personal Bible studies. They invite people to meetings and events. Harold had probably been contacted by multiple congregations, all offering to help him on his spiritual journey. And honestly, maybe that's exactly what he needed. Maybe underneath all that anger and bitterness was just a lonely old man who'd forgotten how to connect with other people. The texts continued for months. Long after Harold had stopped harassing us, long after we'd expanded our business and hired more employees, long after we'd become just another part of the neighborhood landscape, Harold was still receiving daily spiritual guidance. And you know what? He seemed different. Not overnight, but gradually. He stopped taking photos of our building. He stopped standing in his backyard with binoculars. Once, I even saw him wave at Sarah when she was getting out of her car. The ultimate test came about 6 months later. We were having a small celebration. In our parking lot, we just landed our biggest client ever, and Sarah had surprised the whole team with a cake. It was a Friday afternoon, everyone was in a good mood, and we were maybe a little louder than usual. Harold came outside, and for a moment, my heart sank. Here we go again, I thought. But instead of storming over to complain, he just stood there for a moment, then went back inside. 5 minutes later, he came back out with a plate of cookies. "Congratulations," he said to Sarah, offering her the plate. "I heard the good news about your new client." Sarah was so shocked she could barely speak. "Thank you, Harold. That's really kind of you. I've been doing a lot of thinking lately," he continued, "and I realized I haven't been a very good neighbor. I'm sorry about all the trouble I caused." I watched this exchange from our office window, and I'll be honest, I teared up a little. Not because of what I'd done, but because of what Harold had become. Whatever combination of spiritual guidance, personal reflection, and genuine outreach from the Jehovah's Witness community had reached him, it had worked. The most beautiful part of this whole story is that Harold never knew what I'd done. He never connected the sudden influx of spiritual texts to his harassment of our business. As far as he knew, he'd just been blessed with an opportunity for spiritual growth at exactly the moment he needed it most. To this day, Harold still receives those daily texts. And to this day, he's a completely different person. He volunteers at a local charity now, helps elderly neighbors with their groceries, and has even recommended our business to people he knows. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about making someone suffer, it's about giving them exactly what they need to become a better person. Harold needed Jesus, and Jesus found him through about 40 different text messaging services. Looking back, I realized this whole experience taught me something important about dealing with difficult people. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is respond to hatred with an opportunity for love, to respond to spiritual emptiness with spiritual fulfillment. If this story restored your faith in creative justice, smash that like button and tell me in the comments, have you ever dealt with a neighbor from hell? How did you handle it? And if you want more stories about perfectly petty revenge that actually makes the world a better place, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next.